Good evening. It's nice to talk to you. The sunlight got away from us today, and while I walked in the dark, it didn't make any sense to be speaking in the dark, so you could just watch a blank dark screen. So I'm doing this later, a stand-in talk, if you will. And the subject that interested me today, given the talking heads on a Sunday, are how ill-equipped the Republicans are to deal with policy. No Jacket Jordan, who will head up the Judiciary Committee, and a special committee whose sole objective appears to be to launch political attacks using the subpoena power of the Congress for no other reason but to help them, I guess they believe, win elections in 2024, from the smallest election to the President of the United States. It remains to be seen that this is a policy that works. And the example today, which was among the best examples, is during the talking heads, Jordan was asked, don't you think there should be a federal solution for what happened in Memphis when they killed poor Mr. Nichols by kicking and beating and tasering him to death on a stupid traffic offense? And the answer to that is that he didn't think there should be a federal solution. There is already a federal solution of sorts, and it is that the Justice Department will consider whether taking the life of this poor young man at 29 was itself a civil rights violation in the criminal component because they took away his life. Other federal issues that just jump out at you is when the officers who are offending are not prosecuted. Can they conceal their record of brutality as officers when they go from one state to another? Shouldn't there be some protections there? And at first, Jordan, who plainly cannot think on his feet, except when he's trying to interfere with others speaking, couldn't see any federal hook. And the host kept pushing him, saying, well, you described that it would be useful if one could know the record of an officer transferring from one jurisdiction in one state to another. It's interstate, it's federal. And he allowed that, maybe there was something, but he didn't understand it. This is what we're going to see. These issues can be very difficult on the Hill. And the most difficult thing about passing real legislation in the Judiciary Committee, and I've spent a lot of time both on the Senate and the House side in those committees, not as much as some, but a fair amount, because I ran investigations, and particularly in the House, I was consulted by members of that committee, including John Conyers, who was both at different times the chair and the ranking minority member. And so here we have No Jacket Jordan, who has these simple talking points that he's never had to go beyond because he's always been a party breaker-upper. And now he has to talk about real policy. And he is probably one of the worst persons to consider the unintended consequence of writing some ideological platform into legislation and then watching as it tears apart the nation in some way or other because of these unintended consequences. Also, when you have a solution that does not seem to be solved at the state level, that is in fact how, if there's interstate commerce and another basis for passing federal legislation, that you pass federal legislation. One of the most powerful codes after the Civil War was 42 United States Code, Section 1983, which was for civil rights violations. And it allowed one to skip over what was presumed to be states that were not cognizant of or caring of or ready to follow the dictates of individual rights and liberties. And so one could go to federal court to get a remedy that was not available in the state courts. And that's part of it. The Voting Rights Act made provisions that were similar. If there was a violation happening in a state, one could go to federal court, and there were a whole variety, a panoply of solutions to that. I don't believe that Jordan has a clue of any of that, or that he has adequate staff to inform him, or that they dare inform him, because if it contradicts the garbage they breathe and live and talk about in the stump, he's not prepared for this job. And as for his business on the special committee, he's talking about how the Justice Department is weaponized, and they're only going to look at the Biden Justice Department, and not the one that we really know and has all the evidence of being weaponized. That is Barr's Justice Department, so-called, when Trump was president. And if anything, the problem we have now is not that it's weaponized, but it's inert. 2 years pass and we're still scratching our heads. How do we prosecute this thing? It's ridiculous. We did talk about it the other night in Ari's presentation at the gathering that we did. And more people have to talk about those things in real terms, who know something and who have actual programs. Another thing that was interesting was that they had Republicans talking about debt and what should they do about debt. And their solution in part is, well, we got to put things on the table, like Social Security and Medicare. And they do it both ways. They put it on the table and they take it off because they want to send signals to their own constituency and terror to those liberals who think that after spending a lifetime of work and putting away funds in Social Security and counting on it, that they can continue to count on it. And the Republicans, hell no, they don't care about that. So, and another interesting thing is that how the debt decreases when Democrats are in control. And that's happened in the Biden administration. And you may remember back in the Clinton administration, there was a very strong effort to cut back on the debt. It's the economy, stupid, was Bill Clinton's rallying cry, and it cost several members of Congress their jobs for him to try to improve the economy, and among other reasons, among other ways, by reducing the debt. So the Democrats reduce the debt, the Republicans borrow, they then try to increase the debt limit, and both sides, by the way, don't actually plan in your own household, however seriously or disciplined. You have to figure out how much you have and what your costs are and what you can shrink and what you cannot shrink. And the talk of risking your health with less medicine because you have to take care of children and you have to have the money to pay either a mortgage or a rental and so on. These are the difficulties that families face. So they understand conceptually, even when it's in the millions, billions, trillions of dollars, that it's still the same calculation. And we spend an enormous amount on quote, defense, which takes me to another point, which is that there was talk on Sunday by a general of, he's concerned about that we're going to have war with China over Taiwan. It is so remote a possibility it shouldn't even be mentioned. And to the extent that we want to help allies, and I'm thinking of Ukraine, we finally have said, well, we'll give you tanks, and but it'll be months from now. We got to train you. We got to adopt them. We got to do. Vitamin at the beginning of our support for Ukraine said something really interesting, and it was that he thought that the national advisors were dragging their heels. Like they wanted to do enough to cause Russia trouble, but not so much as to help Ukraine win. Doesn't that sound like a Washington decision? And we all know that in our lives that if we're less the motivation and impulse and resolve and dedication to get something done, and the inches that matter at the end, you may not get it done because you don't have 100% dedication to the problem. And it seems, we show up a dollar short and a day late, that's the expression. Well, in our case, it's billions of dollars and it's months later. So that's a shame. And the question of our own economy is something really interesting. I've been telecommuting, as have been others, and I have found it's been very efficient, and it's less wasteful than traveling back and forth for no reason than to be in an office and peck out on a machine what is mostly what a lawyer does, which is creating documents. Now we meet with clients during the COVID pandemic. I did, like everybody else, a lot of Zoom meetings, and I still do them now because they're a way to be connected to someone without a meeting that may be unnecessary and take time away from the client and perhaps from you if you're going to the meeting and it's someplace other than your office. And why do we want to be billing our clients for traveling around? It just makes no sense. Well, One of the manifestations of this is there are a lot of buildings that are not being rented. Business buildings are not being rented, and why? It's because a lot of people are telecommuting. I don't know if somebody's going to torture this to mean that we should do something else, but it is something to be concerned about. The other evening when we were talking about what if the matter on January the 6th ended up before the Supreme Court, what would happen? And the answer is it could have been a real disaster because, as I said at that meeting, we have a bench that was chosen by Trump, for Trump, and it is as likely that they would step back and say they can't be involved, it was a political question, or if they did get involved, we might find John Roberts, the most moderate of the group, in a 5-4 decision, supporting the overthrow of our government. And that's pretty dramatic, and it has happened in other nation states, hasn't happened here yet. The closest was the Gore-Bush election, in which the Supreme Court preempted the state that we care so much about now when you hear the talking heads and you hear No Jacket Jordan, that was Florida's decisions were preempted by the Supreme Court. And it's very possible if they waited, there would have been the same conclusion by the state courts. We'll never know. And the Supreme Court passed a decision that has no precedential value, meaning it should influence no other case that comes after that. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? The final observation I have is, there was a group called Scorpion, and that group has been disbanded. That's in the case of Mr. Nichols, because the people who assailed poor Mr. Nichols were from this unit, the Scorpion unit. And so I've looked up what it's supposed to do. What it's supposed to do is combat violence. And then what does it do? It is violent itself to citizens. So that's all I've got this evening. It is kind of more of the same, and I think we're going to have to be vigilant. I'd like to believe that the majority of America, and the numbers are there, are concerned that we stay close to the principles of law and the Constitution and to common sense and to logic, so that when we're talking about what do we do with our budget, well, maybe we look at what we need for defense if what we're really doing is just selling military weapons and so forth. And we have to find common ground, if not with the Republicans who are there now, with Republicans who may replace them, and perhaps more Democrats will defeat those Republicans who have the most extreme and nation-unfriendly legislation in their minds. Having never tried these things, in reality, it's easy to talk about what they think should happen when they have no idea what the consequences would be. So I'm glad I had a chance to get together with you, and perhaps I'll be in the light tomorrow and walk amongst my trees. So thank you for joining me. Again, thanks for all the kind things you've been saying, the notes you've been sending. Holly is greatly appreciative, and we're thankful to have so many people who care. But it doesn't surprise me in one way that the best people, the people that are going to save this nation from autocracy and monarchical policies, are you guys out there, you guys and gals. Thanks. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.